Hi everyone, this is Andrew Prima, Ukrainian American, living and reporting from Kiev. In today's podcast, week 71 of war in Ukraine, and this is the first week of July 2023. In today's podcast, we're going to talk about how Ukraine set up a death trap for the Russians in Bakhmut, what happens in Crimea, and the results of Wagner Group coup. The Putin is weak. Ukraine tries to set up a destruction trap for the Russians in Bakhmut. If you look at the map of hostilities, Klishivka village is not just a point on the map. It's a very strategic point where the Ukrainian troops occupied the commanding heights near the village. And the village itself is located in the lowlands, but the heights next to it are occupied by Ukraine armed forces. By occupying the dominant heights in the area, with a constant fire, we forced Russians to leave the territory around the village. Our troops are currently performing tactical tasks of clearing the territory, and after the territory is free, not just around Klishivka, but a little further south of there, and around the commanding heights. After the territory is ours, our artillery will already be brought there, and it will already begin to control the south of Bakhmut itself, from the commanding heights, at least to the Bakhmut River. In the north, the same actions are taking place in around the Berhivka village area. The same settlement is also located in the lowlands, but next to it there are dominant heights. The occupation of the heights, which is currently taking place, will be the third reign over Bakhmut, and one can say then we will already take Bakhmut, at least into an operational environment. There is such a concept. A term when from the commanding heights we can control entrances and exits to the Bakhmut. After that, the so-called operational entourage of Bakhmut will end. It will be completely shut from the three sides. From the west, in the same heights, Chasov Yar area, from the north, from the Berhivka village district, and from the south, from the Klishivka village. That's why Ukraine armed forces create such a melting pot. This is how the Russian armed forces will be destroyed in big numbers. Well, everything will depend on how long the Russians want to die in Bakhmut. If they're satisfied with 200 deaths per day, then it's fine for us. They can sit there until they all die. There is good training ground for the destruction of the Russian army. Is just in Bakhmut itself. If they get tired of it, they can leave at any time and they can retreat toward Popasnaya village. The execution of combat tasks by Ukrainian General Sirsky under the command of General Zaluzhny was very competently constructed, and this process will end in the next 2 weeks. And then, such a training ground for the destruction of Russian troops will be ready. How can Russians react to this event? So, I believe they have two options. The common sense and a military will prevail, and the Russians will simply leave Bakhmut. This is an affordable defensive position for the Russians. A favorable position for defense is the Papasna district. From a military point of view, it's impossible to stay there because the Russian troops will be totally destroyed, and from an information point of view, it's impossible to leave because it will be an even worse reputational blow than leaving the right bank of Kherson and the Kherson region. This is what kind of trap Prigozhin created for the Russian army, for the Russian generals, for the Russian military and political leadership. Therefore, in the near future, it will be clear from the actions of the Russian troops whether their military thinking or political thinking will prevail. If it's a military one, they will withdraw from Bakhmut after we organize an already operational encirclement. This is such a training ground for destruction. They are will move to Papasna to save the troops. If the political vision of the development of the situation prevails, then they will have to transfer more than one regiment to the Bakhmut district to strengthen this direction, but remove from other areas of the front. But they have one front that they can sort out that is, let's say, the same as Zaporizhia or Kherson front. So, so basically, they have to take the troop from Zaporizhia and Kherson directions and throw them in Bakhmut to strengthen its positions. But at the same time, they will weaken Zaporizhia and Kherson directions as well. If you look at the map from the informational and political point of view, it's not even so scary for Russians to lose the Zaporizhia or Kherson directions as to lose Bakhmut. That's why I think they will probably still shift, reduce the density of troops in the Zaporizhia direction. This is what Ukraine needs. We have a general strategic direction to the Azov coast, to the crossing of the land corridor to the Crimea. So, just such actions in the context of all actions on the front line are very beneficial for Ukraine. We just basically cut them in a trap. By the way, it was created by Prigozhin and Sirsky, Ukraine General Sirsky, in this sense, worked according to the direction, but the general context of the offensive actions developed by General Zaluzhny foresees just that. Therefore, I think, after all, the Russian political leadership will be at stake now. They will have to transfer troops from the Zaporizhia and the Kherson region to, to help the Bakhmut forces. But this is exactly what we need. And we will have a chance, when those positions are weak, we will have a chance to break through Zaporizhia in the near future and start moving toward the Azov coast. So, what is current situation in Crimea? Crimea, the complexity of logistics is felt after attacks, Ukrainian attacks on the bridges near Changar. Russians redirected the entire main flow of the road transport since cars and trucks are now not allowed to cross the bridge from Crimea. They have to either cross the ferry to the territory of the aggressor country or get to the Rostov region by land corridor through the occupied Melitopol city and Mariupol. Now it's all in slow motion. The car traffic jams of 10 kilometers or approximately 7 miles are recorded near the Kerch Bridge, the main bridge, back to Russia. The border guards are conducting a total inspection of each car. This was never recorded before. I can explain this by the fact that there is a very suppressed hysteria in Crimea on the part of local authorities. They would like to say out loud somewhere that this delays tourists who are in a hurry to Crimea. But in the occupied territories, no one can say anything against the military or the Russian special services. The local authorities want to show that tourists are coming to them, but they are not allowed. The reality is that there is a thorough inspection of every car in each bag in those cars. It's like one of the same district border between countries. Experts say that they are afraid of explosive that can be carried out on the bridge. There's a version that Wagner Group may be involved in something. Such security levels are not removed and inspections continue. Everyone in Russia is aware of that Crimea is a frontline territory. It turned into that last year, starting in August 2022, when the military airfield in Fedorovka was attacked by Ukrainian rockets, and then the whole series of explosives followed, in particular, a huge hub of ammunition and military equipment near Jankoy area. The Russian military command and special service expect an attack from Ukraine. They expect the armed forces of Ukraine to come to liberate the peninsula soon. Therefore, in the future, all actions that will be carried out around Crimea will be based on this approach. Despite on how the course of Ukrainian counteroffensive is perceived, and the statement that the Crimea will be definitely liberated is spread around. So Putin is now weaker and more isolated. The elites around him more disjointed and worried, and the system he created started falling apart. The crisis provoked by Russian failures in the war against Ukraine and Putin's exceptional lack of understanding of the internal realities of his country has sown deep uncertainty and anxiety in the Russian system. The uprising of mercenaries of the private army Wagner Group, led by Yevgeny Prigozhin, which took place on June 23, 24, became a tectonic moment in Russian politics. Still, new details continue to emerge, and these shocks will shape the political landscape in Russia and possibly even in Belarus. There are several conclusions the world has made from this rebellion. First, it was a full scale crisis of Vladimir Putin's presidency. Although the head of Wagner Group Prigozhin didn't openly call for the overthrow of Putin, the logic of his rhetoric and demands, his fierce criticism of the official jurisdiction of the invasion of Ukraine and the system that launched it, as well as mobilization of fighters and heavy weapons for the march on Moscow, posed a direct threat to the regime. The Kremlin panicked, and Kremlin's panicked preparations for the defense of the capital betrayed its fears that thanks to Prigozhin's fury and ambitions and the wider sympathy he aroused in other power structures, the situation could get out of the control. Viktor Zolotov, the head of the Russian Guard, created by Putin as his personal bodyguard, expected Wagner Group to break through to Moscow. Secondly, these events show Putin's extreme misunderstanding of domestic realities. The crisis was entirely his fault. Prigozhin was Putin's creature, and his rise depended entirely on Putin's patronage. As Putin now admits, the state generously financed Wagner Group. Putin's failure to recognize the threat this posed, despite months of rising tensions between the Wagner army and the Russian military leadership. It demonstrated his isolation and caused the misjudgment that followed. In this connection, the question arises what else Putin doesn't understand about Russia as well as about its war in Ukraine? Third, the crisis undermines a key rationale for Putin's rule to ensure stability and security in Russia after the chaotic 1990s. His central message from the very beginning of his presidency was the need to create a vertical power of single hyper-centralized state administration. Yet he has presided over a fractured security establishment that has led to open, deadly violence. At least 13 aircrew have been killed in the uprising, even as Russia faces a major Ukrainian counteroffensive. Fourth, the crisis exposed the fragility of the Russian state. The troops of Wagner's army marched nearly 1,000 kilometers toward Moscow almost unhindered. Perhaps more importantly, some of the Russian elites offered quick public support. Some expressed alarm, others silently watched how events would develop, others just simply fled Russia. Putin himself publicly warned about the collapse of the state and the mass unrest, drawing analogy with 1917, a revolution in the face of military defeat, as well as turmoil that acquired historical resonance, the troubled time of the beginning of 17th century, marked by extreme violence and instability. Fifth, Putin's need for the mediation of a foreign leader he despises and has long sought to subdue to prevent a large scale armed conflict further exposes Russia's weakness. It's not yet clear whether Belarusian ruler Lukashenko acted autonomously rather than simply trying to be helpful, but he played an active and perhaps indispensable role in diffusing the crisis. Having known Prigozhin for 20 years and being able to offer him safe exile, he was given a unique opportunity to play this role. Lukashenko has made it clear that it's in his interest to help prevent the collapse of the central government in Russia, but the Kremlin, as before, needed him. In doing so, he rapid the help that Putin gave him in he helped Putin immediately the way that Putin helped him in 2020 in suppressing a peaceful uprising in Belarus. Finally, the last one. Six, Russia's failures in its war against Ukraine have been causing rising tensions at home for several months now. The question has always been how this will develop into an open political challenge and what form it will take. As always, in highly authoritarian regimes, it came from within rather than from below. It's striking that this didn't come from the most elites, who, despite their performative humility, were quietly dissatisfied with the war from the beginning, but from a vocal minority, mostly security forces, whom Putin gave the right to criticize military actions as insufficiently decisive and effective. Although Putin is not in immediate danger now, Wagner private army Wagner Group has unique resources and a proven track record among so-called private military companies. The recent uprising has sown deep uncertainty and anxiety. For all his brutality, Putin has structured his military operations in such a way as to avoid domestic tensions and condemnation from major non Western powers. A full scale security war would most likely remove such restrictions and lead to something much closer to full scale mobilization. For most elites, this is a terrifying prospect. This is why Kremlin's investigation into the broader circles of Prigozhin's accomplishes matters. Putin's relentless hatred of those he considers traitors is well known. It follows that anyone who was willing to support Prigozhin's movement knew the stakes and was willing to risk his future at any cost. This indicates the depth of alienation among those who have access to the means of violence. Putin now is weaker and more isolated. The elites around him are disjointed and worried, and the system he created is more unstable than ever before. He counted on a quick victory in Ukraine, not on a long and expensive conflict. Although he has had to adapt and improvise, he remains confident that he can beat Ukraine. He remains confident that he can beat Ukraine and the West in a contest of determination. However, this is less obvious now than ever. The dogs of war he unleashed may yet return to devour him. Thank you for listening. If you like the podcast, please share with your friends.